President, I think for the next half an hour, Senator Merkley and I are going to have the opportunity to outline specifically how this affects small businesses in the real world. And that has always been our concern. You know, one of the proponents of the bill earlier today talked about, big businesses and big businesses getting a free ride and in all this. That's not what this debate is all about. If you're from Oregon or Montana or New Hampshire, what you're concerned about is your small businesses. These are innovators or people without lobbies and political, action committees. They're small businesses. Someday they'd like to be big, but they're trying to compete in a nationwide, marketplace, and they are overwhelmingly in opposition to this bill, and for understandable, reasons. They hear that this is all about states' rights, and then they actually look at what this bill does, and this bill coerces them to collect taxes for, in effect, thousands of jurisdictions around the country. Now, it's been my interest, Mr. President, and I want to repeat it again, to work out a compromise on this issue. Our side has put down on paper a number of proposals that we think ought to be the basis for trying to work out a position that would allow, from our standpoint, at least some semblance of a right for a state to make its own judgments here and not be coerced into just going along with a piece of legislation that forces our small businesses to collect these taxes for everybody else. And the way I've compared it, whenever the proponents of the bill say they're for states' rights, what I've said is they're really for states' rights if they think the state is right. And I'm going to now read some examples because my colleagues have said they want to hear specific instances. Here's what we heard from the Oregon nurserymen. These are not big businesses. These are not businesses, colleagues, with 500 people. These are businesses with 5, 7, 8 employees. Senator Merkley and I are very proud of our Oregon nurseries. They produce an extraordinarily high-quality product, ranked 1, 2, or 3 in every category of nursery products. And the reality is, those are products that are being sought out by Americans in every nook and cranny of the nation. That's how free markets are supposed to work. The seller of high-quality goods wins sales over those supplying lower-quality goods. What this bill is going to do, as outlined by the small businesses that Senator Merkley and I represent, the Oregon Association of Nurserymen, this bill is going to add substantial costs to Oregon retailers and make it more difficult for them to compete with lower quality sellers in other parts of the country. So here's a letter, and I'll quote from it, Mr. President, from the Oregon nurserymen, the growers and sellers of plants and trees, and they're a prototypical small business and a backbone of our economy. And I quote here, "It's my view that this legislation would force small businesses to spend precious time generating endless sales reports for government instead of tending to customers, selling plants and trees, and created traded sector jobs. Oregon growers are far away from their markets, and we need to look to knock down barriers to sales of our green goods." Fewer than 5 people at these firms, Mr. President. And what they're saying, and here's another quote from the small businesses, "Let's call this bill what it is, a transaction tax. As the legislation stands today, the bill will impact the marketplace to the detriment of the small business and their ability to conduct commerce. Congress taxes things it wants to go away." This is what small nurserymen that Senator Merkley and I represent are saying about this bill. They're saying the way they read this, where they would have to collect taxes for people in thousands of jurisdictions across the country, is that the motivation, is the Congress is trying to make this business go away. Now, let me just say categorically, I've known Senator Durbin and Senator Enzi for a long time. They are not interested in an Oregon business going away or anybody else's business. That's not their intent. Regrettably, that's the effect, as I just outlined, from a small business person describing the nature of free markets. We're very proud of what we do in the nursery industry in Oregon. We like the fact that we're selling high quality goods. We're winning those sales over those supplying lower quality goods. But I can tell you this is going to add substantial costs to Oregon retailers, and in their own words, this would put them at a disadvantage in tough global competition. Now, I think, and I want to say this particularly with the senator from Illinois here, because I hope it indicates my desire to try to work something out for purposes of passing this bill. I've made an enormous concession for purposes of an agreement here. This bill clearly gives a foreign retailer a leg up over an Oregon retailer or a Montana retailer or anybody else because it doesn't apply to those foreign retailers. So one of Senator Merkley's constituents and mine, Fire Mountain Gem, exciting business in Grants Pass, Oregon, they are competing in tough global markets. And what's going to happen is this bill, because it will not affect their foreign competition, this is going to cause them to spend time and money that their foreign competitors wouldn't have to do. And they sell all over the country in scores of jurisdictions. And this bill gives a big advantage to foreign retailers because it does nothing to, in effect, level the playing field between the small merchants and the businesses that Senator Merkley and I represent and their foreign competitors. So we've made a concession for the purpose of a good faith effort to try to work this out. I'm not, at this time, pressing to have that flaw, which is an enormous flaw, a significant advantage to foreign retailers over American business. Mr. President, I see the distinguished President of the Senate here, and he has been so eloquent about standing up for the rights of American businesses. We have a feature in this bill that actually gives a huge windfall to the foreign retailer at the expense of the American business. I'm not asking that that be corrected in this legislation, even though I think it is enormous discrimination against American business. Senator from Wyoming and I both serve on the Finance Committee. I chair the Finance Subcommittee on Global Competitiveness. Awful hard to be globally competitive if you give an advantage to foreign retailers. But in the interest of trying to work this out, I've said we won't insist on that being addressed in this bill. We'll have to come back in the Finance Committee and look at that. So what our side has said, Senator Merkley, the senators from New Hampshire, senators from Montana, is just give us the opportunity to be able to tell our constituents, you're not going to have this pushed down your throat. You're not going to be coerced into collecting these sales taxes from thousands of jurisdictions around the country. I don't see how you can have states' rights, colleagues, if a state loses its ability to make any judgments at all about areas where it really wants to make its own priorities. Its priorities are being determined right here in Washington, D.C. with this legislation with respect to collection of sales taxes. Priorities are being made here. And when Oregon small businesses are being coerced by state governments located thousands of miles from Oregon borders, I think that's too much. I think adding a layer of bureaucracy to the large and growing national marketplace fostered by the net in the way this does attacks our most competitive small businesses. And I also want to highlight, because the only amendment I have objected to so far today, Mr. President, has been the one with respect to the Internet Tax Freedom Act that I authored back in 1998, here in the Senate. And the reason that I had to object is the text of this legislation directly undercuts the Internet Tax Freedom Act. And let me be specific. The law that we wrote prohibits discriminatory taxes on electronic commerce. It's Section 1101 of the Internet Tax Bill. It prohibits discriminatory taxes on electronic commerce. But under the text of the bill, in effect, you could require an internet company in one of these states, such as New Hampshire, to collect sales taxes for the Massachusetts government. But if somebody drives from Massachusetts to another one of these states, like New Hampshire, the bricks and mortar store doesn't have to pump the prospective customer for all kinds of information about where they're from or where they're going and the like. So the reason that with great reluctance I had to object to adding to this bill legislation that I'm the original author of here in the Senate is this bill in its current form directly undercuts the essence of the Internet Tax Freedom legislation. So let me, at this time, yield to my colleague, Senator Merkley. I make special note that here in the Senate, where Senator Merkley's made a whole host of important contributions, I've been especially pleased that he has been a persistent advocate for small business. And I know that the senator from Illinois brought up big businesses in Oregon. The brief that we have here has been what this is going to mean to those small businesses, those nurserymen, the Oregon Association of Nurserymen with 5, 8, 10 people. Those are the people that Senator Merkley and I are advocating for. I'd be happy to yield the rest of our time to Senator Merkley.